Alright guys, Billy here back with a new video, and in this video we're back with another updated season ranking after 5 years. This time I'll be updating my season ranking for Australian Survivor, where last time I did it was immediately after Australian Survivor All-Stars, I believe, to where again we have 5 more seasons since then. Literally half the series ago I did the ranking, to where again this will be a ranking of just the Network 10 series, not including 2002 or 2006, which likely would have been towards the bottom anyway. Again, just a ranking of my own personal enjoyment of these seasons, which has changed quite a bit since the last time we've done this ranking. So again, we got 10 seasons to rank here. Let's start off at number 10. My bottom ranked season from Australian Survivor is by far, like not even close, it is Australian Survivor Blood vs. Water. And again, it's by a lot. I think Blood vs. Water has turned out to be probably one of the worst English language seasons I've ever watched. And to clarify again, also, like, it's one that I did rewatch like the first half of the season not that long ago, and even the first half, which again is certainly better than the second half, was not particularly fun to watch, where I think you really have the episode 3 round where Juicy Dave kind of goes crazy, and again, that was really fun. And again, the first like couple episodes are fine, but really a lot of that premium stretch even is then like kind of dull. Only for it to again get increasingly worse when we get to the merge, which just becomes a steamroll for that Men Alliance. And while we get again that strong episode where Jesse goes home, where Sam steals his idol, and again, all that was really fun. Really outside that, it's a really dry season, especially when we get Purgatory involved. And that just drags on the season even more, to where again, we finally get some intrigue again at the final 8, where like Sam goes home, which was a really crazy tribal, even though again one kind of perpetuated by twist. Again, that was a big round. We do actually get kind of a fun like last couple rounds where the final 4, final 5 were both pretty strong, with Mark playing those rounds particularly well. But really it is, again, a pretty dreadful season. One just really sap of fun. It just feels like no one's having a fun time out there. And again, we do see the Blood versus Water theme like really emphasized here. And I think the way that Mark and Sam play the game is actually really interesting in the sense that it really takes advantage of the Blood versus Water theme. But it doesn't necessarily make for the greatest TV by the end. And it's just a spot where, again, this is just a long, boring season, where even the strong points in this season are not nearly as high as the strong points from many other seasons. So where, again, I think that is a common criticism of Australian Survivor, is that it's so long to where there definitely are going to be these dry spots in the season. But again, at least that when the high highs are there, it really hits. Yeah, I feel like with Blood vs. Waters, again, while you do have, again, some highs, it's just simply not good enough to really even make this below a truly awful season of the show, and one that was just kind of a pain to even attempt to rewatch. So again, I think it's a really bad season. One of the worst seasons of Survivor I've ever watched. It's here at number 10. Now number 9, and straight up again, after Blood vs. Water, I think every other Australian Survivor season has a decent amount of merit to it. I think this next like sub-tier to the list, which are spots 7, 8, and 9, I think are all still like solid enough seasons that have, again, decent moments within it. However, I think this is the one that probably has the biggest stretch of like slower episodes, but one that my opinion on the season actually did go up in my latest rewatch of it, and that season is Australian Survivor All-Stars, where there was a point where I was super low on All-Stars. All-Stars was my least favorite season, and again, I still don't think it's great. I still think it's one where, again, a lot of the big names go out early. A lot of them don't really live up to their overall legacies. I think even beyond that, it's a spot where the post-merge is pretty dry for the majority of it, where it's just kind of a David steamroll. Even from an editing perspective, it's so obvious that David's going to win, which, to be fair, is also criticism of Blood vs. Water. And really just a criticism of Australian Survivor in general, is that the editing is typically so atrocious that it's so obvious what's going to happen. And again, All-Stars is kind of the epitome of that, especially by like the midway through the season, where it just felt like there was no other viable winner outside of David, especially considering how fabricated portions of his edit feels like it comes off as. And again, it's a dry season, but there are, again, these strong suits for sure. I do think, again, the episode 3, one of the best episodes in Australian Survivor, that Daisy blindside's just incredible. Beyond that, you also have that like final 8 round where they almost go to rocks. That was really interesting. While again, the entire Zach boot was perpetuated by twist, I thought that was still really interesting TV. And again, obviously it's a cast filled with pretty big personalities. So that's always the thing that benefits these all-star seasons. So while again, they're lesser versions of their original appearance most of the time, I feel like seeing these big names back was really interesting. And again, David going on the win, again, is a very satisfying conclusion for the season. Seeing such a big player like David go on the win was a great ending to All-Stars. Something that, again, a lot of returning seasons usually have these kind of lackluster winners that kind of feel like these like lesser threats on the board. Yeah, David's like kind of the antithesis to that. So again, I think there definitely are strong suits here with All-Stars, especially considering again how great of a character David is, and he's really the backbone of All-Stars here. And it's actually one of the main reasons why I went up on the rewatch. So while I'll definitely still criticize how lopsided the edit was and how painful it was to watch at the time, on the rewatch, knowing that David goes on to win, and not being as annoyed by how obvious it is, I do think it actually leads to it actually being a fun season, but still one that, again, not as good as the seasons that we'll later be talking about. So again, for me, lands here at number 9. Now, number 8, moving on to a season that I've actually rewatched the first half of not that long ago. I never did the full rewatch, though I will be in the not too distant future for a video, which see if that ever gets made. But anyway, a season that I used to be really high on, now a little bit lower on it. That season is the first season, Australian Survivor 2016. And 2016 is a season that I think notoriously is talked about as a season of two halves. The fact that the pre-merge is really good, the post-merge is really bad. And I do mostly agree with that. I do think the pre-merge is, again, definitely the strong point of the season. There are some pretty insane votes that happen early on in the season. I mean, just the Rohan vote, where again, we have almost rocks during that double tribal. That's insane. We have the Rohan vote where he gets blindsided by his own idol. That was really fun. The Craig blindside's really good. Really just the entire story of Phoebe throughout that early portion of the season is very strong. Problem is, again, that post-merge is rough, and it is rough for a while. Especially rough because it's not even just boring gameplay. It's also, again, a lot of people like preaching about honor and integrity and mateship, and again, that's just not interesting to see. And while, again, I do think it picks up towards the end where we get that Brooke blindside, even then, it's still like a slower couple episodes before the finale, which is a very strong finale, where Christy pulls out the win out of nowhere, but it's just still a very inconsistent season, especially in a spot where, actually, through the rewatch, again, I rewatched the pre-merge. The pre-merge is good, but it's still not good enough. It's still not a season that, again, I used to have this like kind of middle of the pack where I used to have it above at least the next season that we'll be talking about. Though, again, I think through the rewatch, I kind of realized that's like, yeah, it wasn't that great. So while there are some very notable storylines on the season, some very notable characters, and again, some very notable vote-offs, I just think the season is just way too inconsistent to really assess too highly. Where again, if I came out of the pre-merge feeling lower about the pre-merge, then I can't imagine how I'd feel if I actually finished watching the entirety of the season where the back half is just so dreadful. Where, again, I think it's a season that, again, in comparison to All-Stars, I think the high points are higher here. I think there's probably more of them. With some of those early votes being kind of insane, but it's still a spot where I just don't think it's a consistent enough season to rate too much higher, to where, again, it's still towards the bottom of my Australian Survivor ranking here at number 8. Now, number 7, moving on to the season that I've always notoriously been pretty low on. It's one that I remember when it aired, I was very disappointed by the season, even though everyone was like really praising it. And in the time since, my opinions kind of stayed the same, though, again, I guess slightly higher than the last season we talked about. And that season is Australian Survivor Champions versus Contenders 2. Which, again, is a season that everyone loved at the time. Again, people were talking about this as possibly the best AU season, alongside 2017. Yeah, I just feel like, to me, not that great. Again, it's a season that has, again, a very unbalanced edit to where like so many people on the season feel like fodder. A season that the gameplay of the season is not particularly interesting for the majority of it, outside of, again, specific characters like David and Luke and Harry. Again, it's very tough to really care about what's happening through the first half of the season when all the people going home are people you just simply don't care about. And while, again, we still do get some pretty big plays along the way. Again, we get a big flip on the Champions tribe against Susie. We also get, again, David and Luke's underdog run in their swap tribe and them surviving over Hannah, which is pretty insane. Again, we get like the Harry lie about having a son. Again, all that is just kind of insane, but it's still not to the point where I ever like assess the season highly. But again, I think over time, I do think I would look at this as better in 2016. I think again, the fact that part of the season, again, still has its highlight. Also, the post-merge is obviously just way better than 2016. Even though, again, even there, I do think there are a few episodes that just feel a bit monotonous. Again, especially, again, that stretch of Simon Black going out 2 times in a row. Even then, we get a very fun endgame. That final 5 round is pretty insane. As much as I never cared as much about the Luke Boot episode, I can understand why people do highly assess that. I will say, though, a criticism of this season is definitely the winning storyline of the season. The fact that Pia is just shoved in our faces in a spot where it was just so obvious she was going to win from the very beginning. I remember, even at the time, watching the premiere, I was like, oh, okay, Pia's won the season, and what do you know? She goes on to win the season. So I think that is definitely a major criticism there. But again, it's a season that, again, I think in comparison to 2016, they're not that far apart from each other. I still think Contenders 2 is, again, a very just kind of mid-season. But I do think it is a bit more consistent in 2016, even though I do think 2016 probably has higher highs, where I actually do think there's like not really like a massive high on 2019. Like, I mean, again, maybe that final 5 round, maybe that Hannah Boot tribal, but I struggle to look at like a major highlight from a gameplay perspective on this season. But I do think it's just a more consistent ride with probably more entertaining characters throughout it. It's just a shame that, again, like half the cast is so irrelevant and the show just makes it so obvious that's the case. But still, I think it's an okay season. So it's here, number 7. Now number 6. And at number 6, again, we're moving on to 2 seasons in a row here that are kind of on the same level for me. I think they're both like solid middle tier seasons of the show with some pretty high points, but also some inconsistency. And I think this is a spot where I very much debate between these 2 seasons. I think they're on the same sort of caliber. At number 6, though, I'm going to go with the most recent season of the show. We got Australian Survivor, Brains versus Brawn 2. And again, Brains versus Brawn 2, I think is a season that I did think was pretty good initially. I thought the first few episodes were pretty strong. The entire like storyline around Nash and like Kent, and you had some pretty insane characters during the early portion of the season. And we also get like the alley boot episode, which was very strong. Once we get to the swap, we had a very fun swap portion of the game with AJ just going crazy and doing all of his shenanigans. Also, you get Miles on the bottom, and you get that crazy Max vote off to where, and all that is very good. And then we get to the merge where, again, we get like the PD vote off, which was a big play. We get the Laura boot, which was very good. Karn boot was pretty good. The Almost Rocks episode was good until they didn't go to Rocks. But again, like it's a spot where, again, there were some strong episodes there. The problem is, again, I think there's a lack of consistency here. Again, in a spot where, again, we just came from 2 really strong Australian Survivor seasons that we will talk about, to go to this, which was, again, kind of just more in line with older school Australian Survivor, was a bit of a downgrade, especially when, again, we had that like big stretch in like week 4 that was very rough, where like the Noonan boot episode was okay, but then we get 2 episodes where no one gets voted out in a row, of the non-elim in episode 11, and then the N quit, definitely harmed the pacing of the season, and the fallout with, again, a very boring merge episode was pretty bad. And we also, again, get a pretty rough stretch at the end. Again, the final 7 on is not the most riveting in the world, where really outside of the final 5 round, it's a pretty slow stretch of the season, along with the fact that also it was just so obvious Miles was going to win from very early on, where, again, after the Max boot, for me, it was essentially down to just Miles and Karn as potential winners, with Miles just being the outright obvious winner at the time that Karn went home. And again, that was just so underwhelming for me, to where, while obviously a lot of people praise how great of a story it was for Miles to go on the win, for me, I just found it a bit lacking, just because it was so obvious, and also in a spot where it felt like the game that he played was just not a satisfying one to me, to where, again, I think he just constantly makes mistake after mistake and just kind of stumbles through it, to where, again, I think it's a spot where by the end of the season, I just felt like it was, again, it was okay. It was fine. Again, there are good points to the season for sure, but again, I don't think it hits the high highs of really end of the season we're about to be talking about. I think the remaining 5 seasons that we're about to be talking about have some really insane episodes of the show. I don't think there really is this like truly elite episode from Brains for Brawn 2. Again, there's some very good ones. Again, the Alley boot, the Max boot, the Laura boot, the Karn boot. I think those are probably like the top 4. But again, it's still not to the level of the seasons we're about to be talking about, which have, again, some of my favorite episodes in the history of the show. Or again, mixing out the fact that, again, there is definitely some inconsistency, some very wonky editing on this season, which, to be fair, is a criticism of the next couple seasons we'll be talking about as well. Though, to be fair, in those, the winning storyline wasn't as obvious as it was with Miles here, where, again, I think as a whole, Brains for Brawn 2, it's okay, but not great, which is why it's here number 6. Now, number 5, a season that is probably going to be lower on here than you would expect if you watched my previous season rankings. This is a season that, at a point, I had as my favorite Australian Survivor season. I think it's a season that I very much enjoy the high highs that this season had. I think the problem is that, again, recently I rewatched the pre-merge of the season, and there's some low lows, which, again, knocked it down a peg for me, especially now that when we have, again, some of these more consistent seasons on the board. At number 5, I do have Australian Survivor Champions versus Contenders 1. A season that, again, I loved at the time. I thought this was an incredible season, especially the back portion of it. Again, the Matt Rogers vote in itself is still possibly one of the best episodes in all of Australian Survivor, one of the best tribals in all of Australian Survivor. And again, from that point on, the season is very strong, where, I mean, outside of them and walking, again, you got the Benji boot round, you have, again, the messed up split where Fenella goes home. You have the flip against Monica. You have a 2-1-1 to get Shawnee out. And it's probably, again, she didn't want to make fire. And then you have, again, a pretty crazy finale where Sharn makes the wrong move and taking Brian, and then completely collapses at Final Tribal. Where again, the end stretch is very, very strong. Is a lot of the reason why I used to assess the season very highly. However, again, after rewatching the pre-merge somewhat recently, it's a bit rough. I do think the early portion of the season is pretty bad. And to be fair, that was always the assessment of the season, that this is like kind of the opposite of 2016. That was a bad start, but a good ending. But I do think having actually rewatched the bad of it, I think it's tough to really say this is one of the best Australian Survivor seasons at this point. Now, again, it does start off very well. You have the Matt Dyson vote off, you have the Russell Hantz vote off at the very beginning. Those are 2 very strong episodes. The problem is after that, again, it's a pretty big snoozer until episode 7 when Benji finally is on the show, which, again, the fact that the biggest character of the season doesn't premiere until episode 7 is so insane. But again, at that point, the season picks up a little bit, but even then we get like a kind of snoozy post-swap phase. And it's not really until, again, the final 9 where the game like really, really picks up, to where I think it's a spot where, again, for me, Champs Contenders, I think has some very strong points in the season. The back like third of the season is some of the best Australian Survivors ever produced. The problem is that it's very inconsistent. Also, again, this is the start of the show being like very imbalanced in terms of its editing. Mind you, again, a pro in comparison to Brains vs. Brawn is I don't think Shane was as obvious of a winner as Miles was, and I feel like her winning storyline wasn't like completely shoved down our throats outside of the like Lydia vote off round. But still, I think it's a spot where again, I like the season. I still have a lot of nostalgia for the season, but I do think it's a season that I just don't look at as highly in the year since, as again, there is a lot of inconsistency within it. So again, because of that, for me, it's here number 5. Now number 4. Now we're moving on to a season that I remember I was kind of like lukewarm on it when it initially aired, but it's one that I did rewatch not that long ago, and my opinion of it did go up a lot on the rewatch. For a while, there's definitely a lot of criticisms with the season, especially how twist heavy it is. I still felt like it was a very fun season. And at number 4, I do have Australian Survivor Brains vs. Brawn 1. Which, again, I think in retrospect is a very fun season. It's a season that has a lot of chaotic gameplay. It's a season that has, again, a lot of twists that, again, you could definitely criticize, like how it affects the game. But I do think it made for an entertaining television product. But while, again, it is a bit scuffed that Kaylee goes on to win the game, and it's a spot where she had previously been voted out. And again, we have so many of these other twists. Probably the most egregious of them all being, like, Danny being able to be the sole vote to eliminate at a point. But it's still a spot where, again, I think it is a just really fun season, but one that has issues. Again, it's not a flawless season at all. Obviously, it's one that has, again, the issue that like half the cast is pretty invisible. Editing is really imbalanced, especially heavily towards Haley and George. But again, it gives us George, one of the greatest characters in all of reality television. Haley herself, also very impressive player. Well, again, I think the editing was kind of a bit too forward in the fact that she was going to win. I still think the way she plays the game was in a very interesting way, in a very dynamic way, in a way that kind of felt like this evolution for Australian Survivor, a show that had not really been super focused in on these like super fans playing the game in this very strategic way. I think, again, Haley and George really brought this like hyper strategic game to Australian Survivor and really made that like the focus of the edit of this season, which I think really helps the season in retrospect. Where, again, while obviously at the end of the day, it is essentially the Haley and George season, and again, so many other people just kind of get shafted in the edit, I still feel like it makes for great TV, and it's a very consistent season. It's one where I don't think there are these like major slow points. I mean, maybe that week where like Flick gets saved by the non-elim is pretty rough, but really outside, again, it's a fairly consistent season. Again, some really interesting storylines. I mean, early on, you have George just on being on the bottom, and you have the flip against Joey by the end of the pre-swap. You have this very chaotic Brawn tribe that had almost evenly split alliances. Again, you do have, again, probably a slower post-swap, especially on the new Brain side of things, but you do still get, again, Big D going out by accident. You have, again, some crazy vote-offs on the Brawn tribe where Shannon goes home and then Simon goes home. You get to the merge where you get the Kez vote-off, which is still one of the better merge episodes in the history of the show. And then again, you get a lot of hecticness in the post-merge. And a spot where you have like Gerald getting taken out. You have like Laura being sniped out of the game because of George saving Kara. You get this like Emmett blindside. You get, again, a crazy final 5 vote where Way gets taken out in a 2-1-0 vote. And then you get like a 2-1-1 at the end where Kara goes home. Again, we get like so many like pretty crazy votes across the season that I do think really makes the season pop by the end, especially when we get an incredible final 2 of George and Haley that really props the season up. To where I do like Brains vs. Brawn on the rewatch. I do think it is a pretty strong season. While there are criticisms from just how twist heavy it is and how inconsistent its edit is, I do think as a whole it's a consistently strong season with fun characters that makes it here at number 4. Now number 3, and now we're getting to the top tier of the list. I think this is the genuine top tier of Australian Survivor seasons. At number 3 though, I'm going to go with a season that at the time that came out, I said this was the best season of the show. However, on the rewatch, it's still good, but maybe not the best. And that season is Australian Survivor Heroes versus Villains. And again, my opinion on Heroes vs. Villains went down on the rewatch. Not that it's bad, it's still good. Obviously, it's still number 3 out of 10 here. And again, amongst the global seasons, it's probably still in my like top 20 or so. But I do think it's probably a more flawed season than I gave it credit for at the time. Now, I will stand by the fact that I do think from episode 7 until probably like the Sean boot, it is a very strong season. Just consistently good episode after episode after episode. Probably the weakest, where I'm too far, we get a mutiny episode along the way. That wasn't the great. But again, consistently good episode after episode. Where again, there were like a couple like kind of just like lukewarm episodes. And you get like that mutiny episode. You get like the Ben boot round. But again, it's still a very strong stretch of the season. One of the strongest stretches Australian Survivor has had. I think the things I will criticize the season for though, again, I think the first 2 weeks of the show, episodes 1 through 6, are just kind of fine. Like not terrible, but just not particularly interesting. I don't think the season really pops until episode 7. Also, I think the backstretch is pretty bad. I think like final 7 on is particularly rough, especially when we get that non-elim at the final 6 round. And again, it just feels kind of obvious where the season's going by that point. But again, that middle stretch of the season is very strong. Obviously, you got episode 7. Again, one of the best episodes, possibly in reality TV show history. Again, touted as the greatest tribal in Survivor history. Again, an insane series of events that lead to Frasier going home. Again, all that really incredible TV. Again, you get a great swap vote where Paige goes out. You get that Jordy vote off, which is insane. Again, the Stevie vote off is also like an insane series of events. You get a great merge episode where David Zaharakis goes home. You get Sam going home after they misplay 2 idols, which is insane. Bonnie's blind side is there. Again, Sean gets taken out with Haley doing the Natalie Anderson. Again, all that very strong. But again, I think the beginning and the end of the seasons are a little bit rough, which is, again, the inconsistency here that really leaves us at number 3, where really the top 2, I think, are like pretty consistent seasons all the way through. I don't think they have a major drought throughout the entirety of those seasons, where I feel like Heroes and Villains, again, while it is very strong in the middle, possibly a stronger individual stretch of episodes than the top 2 seasons have, I still think the beginning and end of the season is what does sink it a little bit here to be here number 3. Not number 2, again, a season that a lot of people held in very high regard. However, it's a season that I have always been a little bit lower on than the general public. While I did very much like it, and it was always one of my favorite international seasons, I did feel like it was not as good as people said. However, I did recently rewatch it, and it is good. Again, it still is Australian Survivor, and through that does still have its quirks here and there, but it still is a very good season. That season is Australian Survivor 2017. And again, 2017 is a season that, obviously, by this point, so many of these people have come back to a ridiculous degree, to where I think clearly one of the best Australian Survivor casts, one of the most consistent casts in the history of the show, also one of the most consistent seasons. Again, it's a season that, again, unlike modern Australian Survivor, where we've kind of gotten accustomed to extremely unbalanced edits, I feel like Australian Survivor 2017 was as balanced as you can get for Australian Survivor, where, I mean, while you got like someone like Kate, and like, I guess you could debate like someone like Odette and like Ben, but even Ben brought some fun moments. I feel like everyone gets their time to shine on this season. But again, it gave us some of the best characters in all of Australian Survivor. Again, you got Luke from this season. You have Jericho, Henry, Michelle, Sarah Talik. I mean, Tara is someone that I hated at the time, but again, still made for good TV here. I mean, AK is a really great early boot. Tessa is a likable presence. Again, just so many people that, again, really stand out from this season. It's a spot where, again, we also get some really crazy rounds throughout it. Mind you, I will say, I don't think this season has the high highs of, again, something like Heroes and Villains or Champs Contenders 1. But what it does have is, again, consistency and also a decent amount of like really strong episodes. Again, the Adam boot round, episode 2, is still one of my favorites. Such a chaotic mess there. Again, you get Tarzan idling himself out of the game. You have the flip against Amy, which was really interesting. You got the Henry boot episode, which is, again, is amongst the best Australian Survivor episodes, even though, especially from like a more downfall perspective. Again, you get the 3-2-2-2 vote, which is still insanity. You get a pretty strong end game where like Jericho ends up going to fire against Michelle. In general, again, I think this is a strong season. The reasons why it's not number 1 for me is, again, I do think there's probably like a tiny bit more slower episodes than the number 1 pick. Also, I do think storyline wise, I think the number 1 pick is, again, a lot more satisfying. And also, I do think this is a season that, again, is older Australian Survivor at the point where they still have 26 episodes. And I think you kind of feel it by the end. So while it, again, is as consistent as it can be, it's still serving its format. It's still not the most consistent on the board. And I still think, again, while it is very, very good, I think there is a season better. So again, it is here number 2. Now, number 1, the best Australian Survivor season is not close. This is actually one of my favorite seasons in general. I actually just rewatched this season not too long ago and still adored it. Genuinely, potentially a top 5 season of Survivor globally for me. At number 1, I do have Australian Survivor Titans versus Rebels. And again, this is just an insane season. It's one where, while again, I think in terms of its high point, is there a high point as high as the Frasier boot, as the Matt Rogers boot? No. But it is just consistently good the entire way. I don't think there is a genuinely awful episode in this entire season, which again is rare for Australian Survivor. I think probably what the worst episode of the season is potentially the merge episode where Scott ends up quitting. But even there, again, there's obviously interesting dynamics considering it's the merge. But again, we only get 2 non-elims on this season, both of which actually being pretty strong episodes in their own right. Again, one where Rihanna was about to go home. The other one, I mean, to be fair, being a bit weaker, but still having a lot of tension there from all these interesting dynamics on both sides. Where again, I think also, again, just in terms of the rivalries on all these sides, those are very strong. And the fact that you get like Mark and Valeria versus Caroline and Kitty, you get Ferris versus Kirby, obviously. We get, again, this like really interesting start to season where both sides end up having the underdogs come together to take out the more physical threats, where again, we get the Frankie and Peta votes both in that first week. Again, Tobias going home because Kelly flipping her vote at the last second is also really funny. We had a great post swap where we start off with the Viola blindside, and then that Sarah vote is just insane with like how many things are going on there. Garrett getting taken out. with Ferris not playing his idol on him was also really interesting. We get episode 10, which again, episode television, again, don't love how contrived it is. The fact that we get Charles getting taken out where all but 3 people lose their votes. And again, I think the thing that really saves it by the end is the fact that we get this like really interesting split vote within it. But still, it's like, I do think it's a spot where again, definitely feels fabricated. But again, we obviously get like the insanity that is Kelly throughout this entire pre-merge. The fact that she lasts throughout the entire pre-merge is kind of insane. And in the post-merge, again, we had this great story between Ferris and Kirby and them essentially running the game. Again, obviously it's a lot more nuanced than that, but still, again, like we have the flip against Winna at the merge. We then have, again, the Rebels coming together to have that insane Eden Boot tribal, which I still think is one of the best tribals in the history of the show. Probably one of the best episodes in the history of the show. Then you get, again, other good episodes like Jaden getting taken out where Raymond flips his vote at the last second. You obviously have Raymond using the ultimate vote advantage and taking out Valeria, and all that was a really fun episode. Even like the Alex boot, which was one of the weaker episodes of the bunch, still has a lot of arguing within it, with a lot of this like Alex Kirby feud. Like the Kitty boot episode also even has like Caroline attempting to make this move on Ferris and falling on her face, where again, all that was really interesting. And we get a really interesting end game where like everything kind of goes wrong for Ferris in the end game stretch, only for him to still pull out the win by the end, where again, and also just Ferris winning is still one of the most satisfying winning storylines in the history of the show, to where again, I really do like Titans vs. Rebels. I think it is a truly elite season. Again, it's the best Australian Survivor season. I think it's my favorite international season. I think it's also, again, possibly a top 5 season of me, even amongst the U.S., where, again, I'll always have a special place in my heart for Cagayan, and obviously Heroes of Villains is Heroes of Villains, but outside of that, I think it is on par with seasons like Pro Islands, seasons like Dave vs. Goliath, seasons like Micronesia. I think it is in that tier, to where I think this is a truly elite season of the show, one that is remarkably consistent considering it is 24 episodes. And it's a season that I think really makes the most of the Australian Survivor format, a format that, again, I do think is flawed, but I think this is the season that is able to be the least flawed of the Australian Survivor format, which is, again, why I do have it here at number 1. But there we go. I mean, that is my updated season ranking for Australian Survivor. Now, obviously, again, coming up, it's obviously intending to be out before AE vs. the World, so I'll obviously be doing coverage of that when that eventually comes out. Also, I will be eventually doing a ranking of every Australian Survivor player, which will come eventually, so stay tuned for that. Outside of that, more of the same sort of content from the channel. But for now, that is the video. Thank you for watching.